Because I've got to make a decision about my next vehicle build. And I thought, what a great time it would be now for me to make a video about my love of Land Cruisers. I'm Andrew St Pierre White. Join me as I share my passion for building four-wheel drive trucks and then travelling to the remotest parts of the world. You see, I have to replace this vehicle. I don't have to, but it's what I do for a living. I build vehicles, and this is by far the best looking vehicle that I've ever built, and it is certainly up there in terms of performance. But it was time for me, I felt, that I share my story about 17 or so years of my life with Land Cruisers. Not all 4x4s are created equal, especially in the eyes of the customer. That is why the 4x4 equipment business is so vast. When somebody buys a 4x4 and walks into the showroom, when they take the vehicle away with them, they immediately start thinking about how they're going to change it. Because customizing a 4x4 is part of the excitement of off-roading. No vehicle is going to be perfectly adapted to a specific customer's needs as it leaves the floor. So this is a typical example. I've chosen this Land Cruiser and my passion is off-road exploring. I have a family, so I'm going to have to do some work to convert this one. I'm also passionate about really long distance remote traveling, so I'm going to have to do some more work to a vehicle that is actually designed for farming and mining. I had a Geländewagen, a G-Wagon, and I had it for about 3 years. And I sold it because I was offered a ridiculous amount of money. I mean, close to twice what I paid for it. And I had put 150,000 kilometers on it. So I thought, well, it's a good opportunity to sell it. And then I didn't know what to do. I really didn't know what to do. Now, the interesting thing is that while that happened, if I look back at it now, it's what I do for a living now. Then I had written a lot of books. I was doing a lot of magazine articles, and I had was preparing to do my first television series, and that series was actually based on all my DVDs. I had a how to drive a four-wheel drive, recovery, wilderness, overlanding DVD. I had about 4. And so I compiled all the material from those DVDs and actually created a television series, which was first broadcast in 2005. Anyway, the idea was to do something special and do something that I've never done before, and that was to buy a pickup or a ute. This was, of course, before Toyota had developed a double cab 79 series that didn't exist. It was a, I had to buy the single cab and have it converted. This is Miano and Sons in Krugersdorp. They've been cutting up Land Cruisers for longer than just about anybody else, and I have entrusted my vehicle to them. And there was a company called Miano and Son. They operated from a place not far from Johannesburg called Krugersdorp. They had a workshop factory there, and they would convert 2-door Land Cruiser 79s into dual cabs, and they did a very, very good job. In fact, I know that when Toyota were developing the 79 dual cab, they went to visit Miano. Des, if you ever watch this video, I sure hope they paid you a lot of money. So I was one of, I suppose, a couple of 100 conversions that they did. The conversion was great. In fact, I would say better than great, because you know, you expect a certain level of quality when you're buying a car from a manufacturer, not from a small workshop and you can excuse a few issues here and there. There were none. it was really, really well made. Stuart, I want to fit a safari snorkel onto my vehicle. Why do you think it's a good idea that I do it? And I remember going to my mate, Stuart Bailey, to have a tank done.
A raised air intake, I think, is most probably a better word to use. Okay. So when you think snorkel, you think flippers, goggles.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, okay. Why must I put one of these in?
The biggest killer of off-road engines is dust.
The fitting of a wheel carrier means that a massive 170-litre auxiliary fuel tank can be fitted. It's controlled by a simple valve, and it gives the cruiser enough range to drive from Cape Town to Byte Bridge. And the guys at ARB gave me suspensions, and we put this vehicle together. And I remember a chap called Adolf Weidlich.
We still use the same bearing setup like you see here. We use approximately 48 bearings depending on the size of the unit, but in your case 48 bearings.
What kind of weight can I put in this straw? I mean,
we rate these straws at 150 kilos each.
He actually passed away last year, but he built some very, very nice off-road kits for vehicles. In his typical German way, they were extremely well engineered. Some would say over-engineered, but his nickname was Grumpy Old German, but actually he was an extremely nice man.
You also have the option of fitting a full rail. Right? You can have a rail that, it goes right around the rack.
Or two half rails.
Or two half rails.
And he helped me with a lot of kit, including the roof rack. And the vehicle itself was fantastic, but for that engine. I remember taking it down to John Rich's place down in Natal. For those of you who don't know, Stony Ridge Off-Road Academy, at the time, maybe still is, one of the best four-wheel drive training academies in the country. A no BS, no hype training school for off-road. And I used to go down there quite a lot. And it was John who actually got my Land Cruiser stuck. And we filmed something for one of my DVDs. It was all about getting unstuck in situations where it's a very light recovery. We found ourselves in a situation where the only anchor point in front of us that we're able to attach our cable to is not very strong. So I'm going to help the winch by doing two things. I'm going to crawl the vehicle, drive as slow as I possibly can as the winch pulls in. Another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure my steering wheel is pointed directly towards the anchor point, so there's the least amount of resistance. And we had a winching operation where we had a winch anchor that was very weak, but it was going to be of help. And I remember John driving it, and I actually enjoyed watching him driving it more than I actually enjoyed driving it myself off-road. I found it a bit cumbersome. I was used to Geländewagens and Discoveries, and I was used to very nimble off-road vehicles, and this wasn't one. You know what the measure is? The measure of a vehicle you can love is when you, on a Saturday afternoon, and you're not sure what to do, and you go for a drive. Even if it's to go and buy a Coke. If you don't just want to get into it for the sake of getting into it, then it's wrong. And the trouble is with that vehicle was its engine. There were two engine choices with that vehicle. It was the 1HZ, that's the 4.2 six-cylinder non-turbocharged diesel engine, and it's not particularly powerful, extremely reliable, very rugged, and da-da-da-da-da. Alternatively, you could get the 4.5 six-cylinder engine, the FI engine, multi-valve, 4.5 petrol, lots of power, extremely reliable motor, very good gearbox, much better than the diesel's gearbox, but they're heavy on fuel. So at the end of the day, the diesel was very heavy on fuel. So what's the difference? Yeah, the petrol still would have been heavier on fuel, but it would have been nice to drive, and not that much heavier on fuel for it not to be as suitable for an overlanding touring truck, because I could carry lots of load and lots of fuel. It wasn't light on fuel, and it wasn't powerful. So that ruined the whole experience. I only actually did one big trip in that Land Cruiser. It was a 2-week shoot to the place called the Richtersveld, far northern, northwestern part of the country. There is its only desert mountains. They're called the Richtersveld. And I took the Land Cruiser and did a whole lot about building vehicles and examples of voltage draining connections found in some of his clients' vehicles. This is what a good crib looks like. You know, then we didn't have YouTube, then it was DVD, and we were making DVDs and of course taking photographs for my various books, and there were some magazine articles as well. And I sold that vehicle, and I don't think I kept it for more than about 2.5 years, not very long. And I got a lot of money for it, a really good amount of money for it. And I thought, well, you know, what do I do now? And it was a toss-up between, it was this kind of challenge. I want a vehicle that I can use, that's priorities, I can use for my work. But at the same time, I want to do something interesting. After that, I went for the 105. Now, 105 is, some of you will know this, basically it's an 80 series chassis with a 100 series body. Wasn't sold in a lot of countries. We luckily in South Africa and in Australia and a few other countries could get them, but not in a lot of countries. So I thought that's the one for me. It's got solid axles. I like solid axles. Yes, I'll go back to a station wagon, but think about the comfort, and I'll get the petrol engine. That was another mistake. I love the car. I mean, this was the definitely. I did not fall in love with Land Cruisers. Before the double cab, I actually had a sponsored 90 series with the second generation Prado for a whole year, loaned to me by Toyota, and it's a very good vehicle, and I liked it a lot, and it was what kind of got me into Toyota. The 105 is a lovely vehicle to drive. Now, you can't really compare them with the 79, these kind of vehicles, the 70 series vehicles, and the 100 and the 200. You can't really compare them because those are luxury wagons. Now, the 105, because of its 80 style chassis with solid axles, wasn't nearly as comfortable to drive as the other higher spec model 100s with the independent front suspension, but it was still very comfortable to drive, and it was very good at carrying a load. Better than the independent front suspension vehicles. And when it was delivered, it was undersprung, lousy clearance. He used to drag its spare wheel, which was hung underneath. He used to drag it through. You couldn't actually use the 105, the one that we got anyway in South Africa, for off-roading because it didn't have enough clearance. It took very little to get them right. So just a little bit of a lift, and if you could get the spare wheel off the back, so you could put in another tank, because it carried a 45 sub-tank at the back and a 90 main tank, you could change the sub-tank for 180 litre. So you got 180 plus 90, you've got a really healthy amount of fuel, but you have to find somewhere to put the spare wheel. And so I did a trip, and it was my first ever film shoot expedition done specifically for a television series. And I took my wonderful 105, and it was absolutely fantastic, but for one thing: the fuel it drank. We're talking about 3 kilometers per litre. 3 kilometers per litre. So we were in the desert filming, and we've actually found ourselves, we had to just say, well, we wanted to do a section. We thought we could do it. We mapped it out. We worked the distances. We couldn't do it. It was so heavy on fuel in the dunes. Our tires were right down. We were doing everything we possibly could. It was impossible. We were using 3 times the fuel My mate Mike Main and his 80 series, which is with a 1HZ, we were using 3 times the fuel. 3 times! It was unbelievable. It was, you know, he was getting 8 or 9 kilometers per litre. But I do remember though, that particular trip was one of the most memorable of my entire life. And here is a sequence of the entire series that I made. The last 5 programs were the trip through the Kalahari, and I felt like Michael Palin. It was the first time I did this probably travel documentary kind of, this whole kind of thing. This is Botswana. This is a part of Botswana that time is kind of left behind. We're lucky enough also to be here with a man who has spent most of his life lecturing and writing about Botswana and the Great Kalahari, and that is Mike Main. And we're very lucky to be here. This sequence now is probably my favorite, I wouldn't say of all time, but it's still right up there in the top 5. What we're going to do now is something a little bit risky. Due south from Kubu are 2 islands. They're called South Islands. It's 10 kilometers across open pan. Mike reckons it'll be fine. Personally, I'm a little bit nervous, but we're going to do it anyway. See you on South Island. This actually looks quite scary. It's a very, very big piece of pan. Here we go, into the wild blue yonder. How far are we across?
You know what she's doing? What he's doing? They've got a nest up here.
Yes.
One of them has gone off that way, and that one is pretending to have a broken wing and getting us to follow her because, or him, it's a hack, because they think that we're predators and we're after something to eat, so that he's trying to distract us and make us follow him and take us away from the nest, which is in here somewhere. That's quite something to see that.
Typical driving in the Makari, absolutely beautiful. You go across the pan, it's all hunky-dory, and suddenly the vehicle gets sucked in. And this is what happens. The mud is very sticky and it sticks absolutely everywhere. Look at this here. It's been forced. See, look at this. Unbelievable. Keeping the steering wheel dead straight. Not sinking in much. Look at that over there.
Have a look at this.
We made it.
Yeah.
We made it. There were 1 or 2 patches.
Did I throw up any mud?
No, you didn't.
No,
Yeah, but Andrew threw up in the car.
Oh, look at this place.
Look at the colours. Look at the colours here. And this combination of gold and brown and black is just incredible.
In terms of performance though, the 105 is what a great compromise between luxury and off-road ability. It was remarkable. It was a remarkable car. And it did everything so well. On today's 4x4 driving section, we're going to explore braking distances on gravel and the effect of ABS on it. And I think I had that vehicle for also about 2.5 years-ish. But I hadn't fallen in love with Land Cruisers yet. I hadn't found the one that suited me the best. Then another Mercedes Geländewagen came into the picture, and I couldn't keep that for long because it was registered in Lesotho, so I only kept that for about 1.5 years, and I would have actually loved to have kept that. I would have still owned it now, not quite, almost, but I mean, that was an amazing vehicle. So at that time, so that would have been early 2008, the 76 wagon was introduced, and I was invited to the launch, and I thought this could really work well, but the engine's options was the 1HZ, the underpowered 1HZ, and the 6-cylinder. By then I'm pretty sure it was a 6-cylinder, the V6 4-litre. I chose the diesel 1HZ engine, thinking that because of a much lighter vehicle, performance would be a lot better. And it was. Well, I've arrived in the southern Kalahari, and I did my first solo expedition, which was my crossing of the Kalahari. It was the first time I decided, well, I can now do this epic trip, and I would do it on my own to find out what it was like to be able to, you know, traveling completely on your own, but also through an incredibly remote area. And I chose the most remote area that I knew, and that was the Central Kalahari Game Reserve in Botswana. And it would be a 6-day drive. And during the central part, which would be about 4 days, I might not even see another human. So it was extremely remote, and there were lots of wild animals around. And of course, and it was that trip that I had my very, very well-known confrontation with a lion. My heart is beating. I was just next to the fire, next to the car. It's about 7:30, just relaxing. I heard the strange noise. There's a lion, and he's right here. He started roaring. So, I mean, I had stuff outside, that all the car doors were open, and I didn't think that there would be a lion around. So I quickly ran around, closed all the car doors, and I'm sitting in the driver's seat thinking, well, how am I going to set up camp to go to sleep? Because wherever the lion is, it's very, very close. Oh, sure. It gave me a fright. Surprisingly, that didn't actually put me off. It actually gave me this heightened sense of excitement about doing something so amazing. Bad news. I've got a flat tire. Yeah, looking at these tires, these are tires that are supposed to be all-terrain. What could have done that? The expedition was not a success, and I turned around. Crossing that much wilderness with only one serviceable spare was not a wise option. Doesn't look so good for my trip. In the 2 or so years I owned my 76, I grew to like it a lot. But I didn't love it. Because I'd had a 105 that was so good in every aspect but for fuel economy. So then I sold my 76 and bought a pre-owned 105. It would have the 4.2 1HZ diesel engine, and I would turbocharge it. When I looked into the idea of turbocharging 1HZ, I immediately came across, no, don't do it, it damages the engine. So I then started learning about it, and I did research for about a year before I fitted the turbocharger. A little bit of an experiment happening here. This is my own vehicle, and I'm a little bit concerned about it, in that I've decided to fit a turbocharger to it. Now, generally speaking, this particular engine, the 1HZ 4.2 diesel, doesn't really like, it's a very, very strong motor, very, very reliable, until you fit a turbocharger to it, and that's a good way of braking it. So I'm going to fit a turbocharger to it because vehicles with this engine are generally a little bit underpowered, and this is no exception. And I fitted a product that had a wastegate control spring. In other words, when the pressure exceeded 0.6 bar, it would actually spill air, so it couldn't overboost. The trouble is overboosting the engines. The top of the crown of the piston of the Wayne HZ is very thin. It's not designed for turbocharging, and if you do turbocharge it at too high pressures, it blows a hole in the top of the pistons, and this was quite well known at the time. So the product was as a result of all this research, and it was fitted by Steve's Auto Clinic. And I then spent a weekend with Steve Fisher, the guy who owned Steve's Auto Clinic. Is a big chain of car performance places in South Africa, quite a successful chain. And I spent a weekend with him, and he taught me all. I just learned so much about turbocharging. It made a good difference with the power when you really needed it, which meant that if to get past a truck, it could get you past the truck. It did increase fuel consumption, a small amount, not a lot, but it just made it nice to drive. It was a difference between okay to drive and nice to drive. This was the thing. And now I had a vehicle that had a reasonable amount of power and a good economy, but it had that magic Land Cruiser 80 chassis. Deja vu for me too. I've heard many people say that Land Cruiser 80 was created in Toyota's finest hour. And I can certainly understand why. I've driven one on a trip, 2 occasions on 2 long trips with 80s, and they are, and even were then and still are, such good vehicles. It's one of those few vehicles in, all of the different manufacturers will say, Land Rovers will say that the original Range Rover and that particular Defender with a TD2 or whatever, they'll all have these, and those were Land Cruiser 80 series with a 4.2 multi-valve engine. I mean, just an amazing machine. Sweet. And if I think back now of all my Land Cruisers that I have loved the most, I have loved none more. One thing about traveling in these Land Cruisers, I have spent many years in many different vehicles, notably Land Rovers and Mercedes Geländewagens. Love them both, but there's a difference, and the significant difference is I never worry about my Toyotas. I just never worry about them. It's not that the others have let me down in any major way, but there's a feeling here. Just put the key in and they run. Take the key out and they stop. And they do that year upon year upon year upon year. Then my second 105 with that 1.8Z engine. And soon after I got it, I embarked on a replay of my solo crossing of the Kalahari. So what do you suppose is different about this trip, and why do I think that this time I'm going to succeed? Well, firstly, different vehicle. This trip remains as one of my all-time favorite expeditions. Without question, my favorite place on earth. And the second major difference is I have a different hat. I'd like to, if I may, read a short passage from the Cry of the Kalahari, which sums up this trip. It was early in the rainy season of 1975, and Mark was driving into Mound for supplies. Because he would be gone for 3 or 4 days, he had not liked leaving me alone in camp, but I had insisted that I remain at Deception to catch up on paperwork. The drone of the engine faded from the dunes, making me one of the most remote people on earth. I stayed behind not only to transcribe notes, but also to experience the sensation of total isolation. Looking over the riverbed for a while, I let the feelings settle over me. It was comfortable. But so total solitude takes some getting used to. Although I was the only person for thousands of square miles, it took a while to shake the feeling that I was being watched. How I understand how she felt. And I did my most challenging 66-day expedition to find the source of the Okavango River. This is going to be, for me, one of the most ambitious trips I have ever undertaken. And here's why. That series I still look back on as one of my most rewarding. It was probably the most challenging I've ever done. My current mount is a 2005 Toyota Land Cruiser 105 series wagon, a relatively uncomplicated and reliable vehicle. On this journey, it's got to take me about 25,000 kilometers. It already has 130,000 kilometers on the Odo. And because I am traveling mostly on my own, at times I will be relying on it for my life. It's a pretty straightforward vehicle. There's nothing particularly special about it. But I'll tell you what was amazing about it. I had Old Man Emu springs and Coney Raid shocks. Namibia greets me on the first day of my expedition with a spectacular airborne display. Of all of the vehicles that I've owned, that was the best ride by quite a long way, I would say. You know, my trouble is, I just can't get enough of views like this. I had driven through Namibia solo, and I had, I remember I was probably 8 or so days out. I was still solo and I was about to meet some people, and I met them I think 3 days later, and I was driving through the Hoorneb River, and it was a very, very hot day. I'd come across some elephants. An elephant had stopped me in my way. Desert elephants. I'd seen desert elephants really close. Desert elephants, to see desert elephants, quite a big thing. I've decided not to stick around either. I'm determined to be on my own tonight. The thrill of total isolation is one of the reasons why I do part of these expeditions all on my own. I camped in this beautiful remote spot all on my own. It really was exquisite. This is what it's all about. I am utterly alone. And it was on that trip and on those few days that I came up with the concept of a troop carrier with a way to live in it like this one. The fact is that the inside of the Land Cruiser 78 Troopy, it's like a cave. The reason I came up with the idea was that I actually wanted a shower. I had been traveling for such a long time and I had no opportunity to have a decent shower. It was just a sponge bath in my tent, and I thought, wouldn't it be great if I could have a vehicle that could carry enough water? And I didn't dream of this shower thing here. I mean, I didn't dream of that. I dreamt of this part, which is the tent that opens. And I worked with Alucab for about 6 months to develop it with them. I mean, that's my very, very basic idea. Yeah. And the line through the middle. He's going to be in charge of interpreting my ideas and bringing them to life. And I said, well, we want the space and want the like this to get out of the weather and be able to, you know, fit tanks and things like this. And then they were very, very. It was great fun. It was great. It was really exciting because it was this new thing. And then somebody came in and said, well, the Germans have been doing this for a while. So what do you think?
I think it's very cool.
Hey, it's nice, eh?
Yeah. Proof will be in the pudding, but I think it's going to work out really nice.
Do you want to see it? And he had some pictures on his phone, and I said, no, I do not want to see it. I know what I want. That's nice. When I first saw the German designs, I was a bit alarmed at first. I thought, oh, look at the finish. Look at the way they've done all of that. Yeah, it's amazing, the quality of all these finishes were far better than anything Alucab. There's no comparison. However, what we had designed was something really, really practical. Seriously practical. In fact, in terms of practicality, this knocks the German designs out of the park. 2 years ago this month, this idea this Land Cruiser, the idea for this vehicle began. I was sitting in the Hona River all on my own, and that was the first time I had ever been given a free rein. I could do what I wanted. And the idea now is I'm in the Northern Cape, the roads are rough, and I knew that the Troop Carrier was the perfect big picture canvas that I could think of. I could think of no other vehicle that would give me that scope to develop a vehicle. I was fortunate enough to be able to keep my 105 during the development of the Troop Carrier. And after the enormous success of my Source of the Okavango expedition and now the Troop Carrier, I sold the 105 in early 2013. So if you want to watch that video, it covers the entire build process, and I did a number of really great trips in that vehicle, some really spectacular trips. The first trip I ever did with Paul Marsh. Our perseverance has paid off. We found a beautiful grassy bank right at the edge of the fast-moving river. Well, here we are in the middle of Botswana, and of course the fun has now begun because the sand is very, very thick, very slow going. We had to drop our tyre pressures down, and travelling with me down there doing all the work is Paul Marsh.
Now to give a bit of tension, back up over the top. Again, very similarly.
I had actually built the vehicle with the idea of driving from Cape to Cairo, and the reason why I didn't is at the last minute a sponsor pulled out 2 months before we were set to leave. They pulled out, and at that time I was considering leaving South Africa, which I did do. For those of you that don't know, I left South Africa because I saw no future for my children there. It's a country in trouble, to say the least, but it is a place I still miss and still travel to quite often, but I did the right thing in leaving. And of course, now living in Australia, doing what I love doing and building trucks. It was about 18 videos from January 2017 to about June. Then I did the Canning Stock route, which was the first major trip I did in this vehicle. But now, of course, this vehicle that I love so much, I'm now thinking that what am I going to do? And I'm going to find it difficult not buying another Land Cruiser. The 79, the 105, the 76, the 105, the Troopy, and the Troopy. So now, having owned 6 Land Cruisers and loved 3 of them and not loved 3 of them, this will tip the balance. I think not buying another Land Cruiser is risky. I'm trying to picture things in about a year's time. I will, towards the end of this year, sell this vehicle and build something else. I am very concerned that I will suffer a seller's remorse. And if I think about all of the vehicles that I have owned and those that I have sold, The only one that I have seller's remorse about was my 105 diesel. My troop carrier I sold in the UK because it financed my entire family's move to Australia, so that was, and I've got a better one now. And if I buy a station wagon, I won't leave it as a station wagon, I'll have to do something with it. Because the fact is that to be able to live in a vehicle and out of a vehicle very comfortably is what I'm used to now. So if I just bought another station wagon with a roof tent on top, it's not enough. I'm giving you a lot of clues. I do have an idea in my head for this. Of all the people that have thus far guessed what I'm going to build next, only one has come even slightly close. So I welcome your comments below. What am I going to build next? Thank you for watching.